The September air was cool and carried the faint scent of rain as I walked through the hospital corridors, one hand resting on my swollen belly, the other clutching a small lunch bag I'd prepared for my husband. 8 months pregnant. Every step felt heavy, but my heart was light with the thought of surprising him with his favorite sandwich. We had waited so long for this moment. Years of disappointment, tears, and two painful miscarriages had nearly broken us. Yet here I was carrying what we both called our little miracle. I remembered the way he had cried the day we saw the positive test, holding me as if the world finally made sense. He had promised we would raise our daughter together, teaching her to ride a bike, hosting weekend barbecues in the backyard, building a home filled with laughter. As I approached his office door, I still believed in that dream completely, never imagining how quickly it was about to unravel. My hand trembled as I turned the handle to George's office, expecting to hear his warm voice or see him buried in patient charts. Instead, the sight that greeted me stole the air from my lungs. There he was, pressed against his own desk, his white coat hanging open as his hands roamed the body of a woman whose face I recognized instantly. Stacy Ryder, the new nursing supervisor. Her auburn hair tumbled down his chest as they kissed with desperate hunger. Medical charts scattered like debris on the floor. It wasn't a single lapse in judgment. The ease between them spoke of routine, of repetition, of a betrayal far deeper than a fleeting mistake. In that instant, time fractured. My entire world, carefully built around trust and sacrifice, collapsed in the space of a breath. A broken sound escaped my throat, half sob, half gasp. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, but the damage was already done. George's face flushed crimson, his mouth opening but no words forming. Stacy, however, didn't flinch. She smoothed her skirt with the confidence of a predator, her lipstick smeared and eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. Then, unbelievably, she laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that sliced through the silence. "Well," she said lightly, as though caught in something trivial, "this is awkward." I staggered back, pressing a hand to my belly as though to shield my unborn child from what my heart already knew. The man who had kissed my forehead that very morning, whispering about our miracle, had betrayed me in the most devastating way. But worse than the betrayal was his silence. George didn't defend me, didn't deny her accusations. He only stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes full of something that looked like pity. Stacy stepped forward, her voice dripping venom. "Did you really think a man like George would be satisfied with someone like you? Look at yourself, swollen, waddling around like a cow. When's the last time you even saw your own feet?" Each word landed like a blade, cutting deeper than the last. I begged George with my eyes to stop her, to say she was lying, to remind me I was still his wife. But he just lowered his gaze, and his silence screamed louder than any confession. The mistress wasn't finished. She leaned closer, perfume thick in the air, and whispered with deliberate cruelty, "He was with me the night you thought you were in labor. While you cried alone, he was in my bed." My knees weakened as the room spun. I had walked in expecting to share a meal with my husband, to feel the warmth of partnership and love. Instead, I stood in the ruins of a marriage I thought was unbreakable, listening to a stranger dismantle my dignity while the man I trusted remained mute. That was the moment I realized betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence of the person who should have defended you, the quiet absence of love where loyalty should live. And in that silence, my heartbreak crystallized into something darker, something that would not stay silent much longer. The tension in that office escalated with every poisoned word. My hand shook as I tried to steady myself against the doorframe, but Stacy stepped forward, blocking my exit. Her eyes gleamed with the twisted thrill of having me cornered. "Where are you going, Violet?" she sneered. "Running away again? That's what you do best. No wonder George wanted a real woman." My chest tightened, rage boiling beneath my fear. I demanded she move, my voice trembling but determined. Her lips curved into a cruel smile. "Make me." I glanced toward George, silently begging him to intervene, to show some shred of loyalty. But he stood frozen, his hands buried in his pockets, watching as if the scene unfolding wasn't the destruction of his wife, but a spectacle he couldn't look away from. Stacy seized the moment, shoving me hard. My pregnant body, heavy and off balance, stumbled helplessly. I hit the floor with a painful thud, my hip and shoulder aching, arms instinctively wrapping around my belly. What happened next is seared into my memory like fire on skin. Stacy stood over me, her face twisted into something feral. Then she lifted her foot and, with terrifying force, kicked me directly in the stomach. The world went black and white all at once. Pain, unlike anything I had ever known, radiated through my body. It wasn't just physical pain. It was the soul-deep horror of feeling my unborn child's safety ripped from me in a single, merciless act. I curled around my belly, gasping, begging silently for my daughter to hold on. As Stacy raised her foot again, a voice thundered through the doorway. What the hell is going on here? It wasn't George. It was deeper, sharper, filled with authority. My uncle, Director Elliot, stood in the doorway, his silver hair disheveled, eyes blazing with fury. Two nurses followed close behind, their shocked faces registering the violence they had just witnessed. Stacy froze, the color draining from her face as reality caught up to her. Within seconds, Uncle Elliot was at my side, kneeling down, his voice calm but urgent. Don't move, sweetheart. Just breathe. Help is on the way. I tried to speak, to tell him about the baby, but all that came out were broken gasps. The warmth spreading between my legs told me the truth before the nurses did. My water had broken, far too early. Panic crashed over me. 8 months is too soon. My baby wasn't ready. Sirens wailed in the distance as paramedics were called. George finally moved, his voice cracking. Violet, I didn't know she would. But Uncle Elliot cut him off with a glare sharp enough to silence a room. Shut up. Don't say another word. For the first time, George looked small, cornered, and irrelevant. The nurses worked quickly to stabilize me as contractions began tearing through my body. I clutched Uncle Elliot's hand, his grip steady and grounding. You're going to be okay. The baby's going to be okay, he reassured, though I could see the storm in his eyes. The paramedics rushed me through the hospital hallways I had walked so confidently just an hour before. Now I was strapped to a gurney, my body racked with pain, fear threatening to swallow me whole. In the delivery room, bright light seared my vision, voices barking orders as a team of doctors worked frantically. And then, amid the chaos, a fragile cry pierced the air. My daughter had arrived, tiny and fierce, fighting for her first breath. They whisked her away before I could hold her, taking her to the NICU where machines would do the work her small body wasn't yet strong enough to manage. I caught only a glimpse of her face, red and scrunched, but undeniably alive. In that moment, through the haze of exhaustion and terror, I made a silent vow. No matter what, I would protect her. Later, as I lay in recovery, Uncle Elliot returned, his suit wrinkled, his jaw set in grim determination. Stacy has been detained. George has been suspended. The investigation has already begun, he told me. His words carried both comfort and a chilling finality. This wasn't just personal betrayal anymore. It was a legal matter, a crime committed inside his hospital. My sister Gina arrived hours later, her eyes blazing with the kind of fury only family can summon. She promised I wouldn't face this alone. The assault, the betrayal, the premature birth. They had crossed a line that could never be erased. Papers were already being filed, charges prepared. Stacy would face justice for attacking a pregnant woman. George would face the consequences of his silence, his infidelity, and soon his deeper secrets. As monitors beeped steadily beside my bed and the weight of the day pressed down on me, I closed my eyes, holding on to the sound of my daughter's faint cry echoing in my memory. That cry was proof that we had survived. It was proof that, despite everything they had tried to take from me, they had failed. And now, with family by my side and the law on our side, I knew the fight for justice was only beginning. When the shock of the emergency delivery began to settle, and my daughter's fragile breaths steadied in the NICU. Another storm was already brewing. At first, I thought the worst had passed, that the betrayal and the assault were the deepest wounds I'd have to face. But the truth was darker than I could have ever imagined. It started innocently, almost accidentally, when my sister Gina sat at my kitchen table surrounded by stacks of medical bills and paperwork. She was combing through the mountain of forms, determined to bring order to the chaos. That's when she found it, an envelope marked with George's name, but never shared with me. Inside was a life insurance policy worth $2 million, taken out in my name just 6 months earlier. I had never signed for it, never been told about it, never even imagined my husband would take such a step without me. My stomach twisted as Gina's sharp lawyers' eyes read the details. The timing was undeniable. March, the very month his affair with Stacy had begun. The discovery gnawed at me. Insurance policies are supposed to protect families. But in George's hands, it looked like a weapon. Gina voiced what I couldn't bring myself to say aloud. That maybe, just maybe, the betrayal wasn't only about lust or ego. Maybe George had a financial reason, a deadly reason for wanting me out of the way. As the days passed, more pieces fell into place. I remembered the tea George had brewed for me the night I'd gone into false labor weeks before. He'd been so attentive, so convincing when he handed me the cup, claiming it would ease my discomfort. Hours later, contractions had started suddenly, forcing me to rush to the hospital in fear. At the time, I thought it was bad luck. Now, under Gina's scrutiny, it felt like a carefully staged trial run. Mrs. Florence, the divorce attorney Gina had pulled into my life, wasted no time. She reached out to medical contacts and requested testing on the remnants of the tea, the supplements, and the vitamins George had insisted I take. The results chilled me to the bone. Traces of misoprostol were found, a medication used to induce labor. Not in lethal doses, but enough to trigger contractions in a vulnerable pregnancy like mine. My knees buckled when I heard the news. George hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had played with my life and the life of our child, gambling on science and probability to create a tragedy that could look natural. The more we uncovered, the less this looked like a love affair gone wrong, and the more it resembled a calculated plot. But the most disturbing revelation came in the form of a photograph delivered in an unmarked envelope. It showed George and Stacy in what appeared to be a hotel room, but they weren't alone. Sitting beside them was a man I recognized from countless news reports. Vincent Caruso, a name whispered in connection with organized crime, extortion, and gambling rings across the city. Along with the photograph was a typed note. Your husband owes people money. A lot of money. The insurance policy wasn't just about starting a new life. It was about staying alive. The words sent ice down my spine. Suddenly, everything made sense. George's expensive lawyers, Stacy's bizarre confidence, even after being caught, the elaborate planning. It wasn't just about passion or greed. It was about survival. George had buried himself in debt with men who didn't forgive and didn't forget. He had looked at me, his wife of years, the mother of his unborn child, and decided I was his solution. The FBI confirmed what the note implied. George had been laundering money through fake hospital equipment purchases, siphoning funds to cover his gambling debts. But the hole was too deep, nearly $3 million owed to Caruso's organization. The life insurance payout would have wiped the slate clean, freed him from both debt and marriage, and left him free to live without consequences, with Stacy at his side. Sitting in Mrs. Florence's office, hearing Agent Santos lay out the timeline of George's dealings, I felt sick. The affair, the manipulation, the tea laced with misoprostol, the staged sympathy, it was all part of a machine built to crush me under the weight of greed and desperation. And the mistress who had mocked my swollen ankles and kicked me when I was down wasn't just a jealous interloper. She was his accomplice. I thought betrayal was walking in on your husband with another woman. But betrayal took on a different shape when I realized he had envisioned my funeral as a payday, my child's life as a line item in his balance sheet. The man who once wept tears of joy at the sight of 2 pink lines had conspired with a criminal syndicate to erase us. The gravity of that truth hardened something inside me. I was no longer just a victim of infidelity or assault. I was a survivor of an attempted murder disguised as tragedy. And if George thought I would cower, if Stacy thought I would be silenced, they had gravely underestimated me. Because now it wasn't just about my dignity or even my daughter's safety, it was about justice. The kind of justice that doesn't stop at divorce papers or hospital suspensions. The kind of justice that drags secrets into the light, that forces the powerful to answer for the lives they tried to destroy. With my baby growing stronger in the NICU and my sister and uncle at my side, I knew the fight was only beginning. They had tried to bury me with lies, but all they had done was give me the weapon of truth. And truth, once uncovered, doesn't let go. The plan to bring George and Stacy to justice began with a wire. The FBI had worked with my attorney and my sister to stage a meeting that would seem innocent enough, a conversation between estranged spouses about custody and closure. But beneath my jacket, barely noticeable, was a tiny device that would capture every word, every slip, every self-serving justification George thought he could spin. When I walked into that house, the home we had once painted together with dreams of family, my heart was pounding not just with fear, but with a strange, steady resolve. I wasn't just a wife betrayed anymore. I was a witness, a mother, and a survivor willing to risk everything to expose the truth. George looked broken when I entered, thinner, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. But his smile came easily, almost too easily, as if he still believed he could charm me into silence. He spoke of mistakes, of debts, of men who had threatened him, trying to paint himself as a victim rather than the architect of my near destruction. His words poured out in practiced tones, but the wire captured them all. His admission that he had used misoprostol to trigger early labor, his confession that the insurance policy was meant to cover his debts to Vincent Caruso, and his cold acknowledgement that Stacy's assault was never supposed to go that far, though he did nothing to stop her. The agents swarmed in moments later, their voices firm, their guns raised. George didn't fight as the cuffs closed around his wrists. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not fear for me or the child he'd nearly destroyed, but fear of the consequences he could no longer manipulate his way out of. That recording became the backbone of the prosecution's case, an undeniable thread tying together adultery, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. The courtroom became my battleground. On the day of the trial, the gallery was filled with reporters, strangers, and survivors who had followed my story through the news. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Mrs. Florence on one side and Gina on the other, their presence grounding me against a tidal wave of emotions threatening to drag me under. When George was let in, dressed in an immaculate suit that couldn't hide the shackles at his ankles, he lifted his chin as though dignity could disguise guilt. Stacy entered shortly after, her once polished appearance dulled by the months in custody, her eyes darting around the room, calculating, restless. The prosecution began with the wire recording. Every word echoed through the hushed courtroom. George's voice admitting to the scheme, to the drugs, to the plan for the insurance payout. The jury watched him closely, their faces hardening with each damning phrase. Next came the testimonies. Dr. Beckham, the physician Stacy had framed years earlier, took the stand and spoke of how her life had been destroyed by Stacy's lies, her career stripped away, her family torn apart. She recounted the evidence planted against her and the manipulations that mirrored what I had endured. Then Sarah Chin, the surgical technician, testified about the falsified logs and late-night pharmacy entries Stacy had orchestrated. Her hands trembled as she held the papers, but her voice was clear. She had been complicit out of fear, but she could not remain silent after seeing what had happened to me. She looked directly at me when she said those words, and I nodded back, grateful for her courage. Uncle Elliot described the moment. He walked into George's office, the horror of finding me on the floor, and Stacy poised above me with malice in her eyes. His testimony was measured, professional, but every syllable carried the weight of a man who had protected his family all his life and witnessed an act so vile he could never forgive it. And then it was my turn. Standing before the jury, I spoke not just as a victim, but as a woman who had seen the depths of betrayal and chosen to fight back. I described the hope I once carried, the mornings filled with promises, The nights I had believed my husband was saving lives while he was plotting mine. I recounted the shove, the kick, the blinding pain, and the desperate terror of giving birth to my daughter too soon. My voice cracked at times, but I did not falter. I wanted them to see not only what had been taken from me, but what I had fought to protect, my child, my dignity, and the truth. The defense tried to twist the narrative. They painted George as a man under pressure from dangerous criminals, manipulated by a cunning mistress, desperate and weak rather than malicious. They argued Stacy was a lovesick pawn, driven by passion rather than cruelty. But the evidence told a different story. The Wire captured George's cold calculations, not desperate pleas. The planted evidence against Dr. Beckham revealed Stacy's pattern of deceit, not blind love. And the photograph with Vincent Caruso obliterated the claim of innocence, showing deliberate connections to organized crime. When Vincent Caruso himself took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. Facing his own prison term, he testified against George, confirming that George had approached them with the scheme and that they didn't care how he made good on his debt as long as they got paid. His words were casual, almost bored, but they sealed George's fate. To Caruso, my life had been nothing more than a debt to be collected. To the jury, it was proof that my husband had aligned himself with criminals who saw murder as just another business transaction. The closing arguments were fierce. The prosecution reminded the jury of the unborn child almost lost, the mother left writhing on the hospital floor, the calculated greed that had fueled every step. The defense tried one last time to paint George as coerced and Stacy as misguided, but the jury had heard enough. After less than 5 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdicts. George was found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The judge's voice was steady as he handed down a sentence of 35 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 25. As George was led away in shackles, he looked at me one last time, his eyes filled not with remorse but with bitterness, as though I had ruined his perfect plan. Stacy's trial followed quickly, charged with assault, conspiracy, and evidence tampering. She tried to weep on the stand, claiming she had been manipulated, that she had only acted out of love for George. But her performance fell flat in the face of the testimonies and the evidence trail she herself had created. The jury convicted her on every count. The judge, unimpressed by her tears, sentenced her to 15 years, 10 for the assault on me and my unborn daughter, and 5 for her role in the broader conspiracy. As she was led away, Stacy turned to glare at me, her face twisted with venom. "This isn't justice," she spat. "This is revenge." I met her gaze and answered quietly but firmly, "Sometimes they're the same thing." The courtroom emptied, but I remained in my seat for a long time, listening to the echo of my own heartbeat, steady and strong. Justice had been delivered, not just for me, but for my daughter, for Dr. Beckham, for every victim Stacy had trampled in her climb to power, and for every silent tear shed in the shadow of betrayal. The trials had ended, but the healing was only beginning. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to exhale fully, knowing the truth had won. My enemies were behind bars, the lies had been stripped away, and my child's future no longer lived under the shadow of their schemes. In that courtroom, surrounded by the cold formality of justice, I found something warm and unyielding inside myself, a strength I had never known before. They had tried to break me. Instead, they had made me unbreakable. Years later, when I stood before a lecture hall delivering my dissertation on trauma and resilience, I realized that survival had given me more than scars. It had given me purpose. My daughter, once so fragile in the NICU, now ran across campus with the confidence of a child who had never doubted she was loved. Together, we had rebuilt a life from ashes, not just surviving the storm, but using its fury to light a fire for others. I had opened a program to support women trapped in cycles of abuse, determined to make sure no one else would feel as alone as I once did. Looking at Mabel's fierce eyes, I knew the truest form of justice wasn't only the prison terms handed down. It was the fact that we were thriving. The best revenge isn't hate or bitterness. It's living well and helping others rise. If my story resonated with you, I invite you to join this community by liking, subscribing, and sharing your own experiences in the comments. Together, we can turn pain into power and ensure that no survivor ever walks alone.